A lot of black rappers are probably angry because some of the white people screaming didn't buy rap until you did it, until they saw a vanilla face on the cover of an album. That probably makes them angry.
In the wake of Prince's death, Sinead O'Connor is making damning allegations about the music icon's history with drugs.
Arsenio Hall revealed evil guests from his famous show, and trust me, their appearances turned late-night comedy into a combat. Behind the forced smiles, false accusations, and canned applause, these moments nearly broke him. And as a black host in a white-dominated industry, every battle cut twice as deep. Queer activists. The first truly explosive moment happened not with a scheduled guest, but with uninvited activists who turned his show into a live protest. For weeks, Arsenio had been facing quiet criticism that his couch didn't feature openly gay celebrities. At first, it was whispers in the press. Then it grew into louder accusations that he was deliberately shutting out voices from the LGBTQ community. And then, one night, instead of staying in the pages of newspapers or magazines, those criticisms came barging straight into his studio.
But this is my show, okay? This is my show. This is my show. You understand? This is my show. This is my show, man.
Imagine the scene Arsenio in mid-conversation, the audience clapping and laughing as usual, when suddenly activists storm the stage, shouting, demanding, calling him out right there in front of the cameras. It wasn't staged, it wasn't rehearsed, it was real, chaotic, and happening live in front of millions. Most hosts in that situation would have panicked. Some would have cut to commercial, others would have had security quietly escort them out. But Arsenio wasn't Johnny Carson. He wasn't David Letterman. He refused to hide. Instead, he stood tall and faced the storm. His response was raw, maybe even too raw for television. He told them, point blank, that he was already a minority, a black man, in an industry where representation wasn't exactly plentiful. To him, the attack felt unfair, like people were ignoring everything he had already done to put marginalized voices on television. He reminded them that he had had gay friends on his show, whether the activists recognized them or not.
You think I haven't had somebody on the show because they're gay? What's wrong with you, man? I'm black. I'm black, man. I'm black, man. I'm the biggest minority you know about. I don't want to hear that gay trash, man. I got gay friends I've had on the show. Because you don't know them or it ain't who you want on the show, you got a problem with it. If you want to book it, get yourself a show.
What made this clash unforgettable was the emotion pouring out of him. He wasn't reading a statement. He wasn't hiding behind polished words. He was angry, hurt, and frustrated, and he said so, live on camera. He explained that his show booked based on content, not identity. It wasn't about whether someone was gay or straight. It was about what they were bringing to the table for the audience. Milli Vanilli. Milli Vanilli sat on his stage, felt like a funeral. Not a literal one, but the death of a career, the death of a reputation, and the slow unraveling of two young men who had flown too close to the sun. Put this in 542 to 553. Rob Pilatus and Fab Morvan had once been the darlings of pop. Their songs were everywhere, their dance moves electrified audiences, and they looked unstoppable. But when the truth broke that they hadn't sung a single note on their records, the fall was brutal. Grammys revoked, contracts torn up. The industry that once celebrated them now mocked them. They were no longer stars, they were symbols of fraud. And Arsenio had the unenviable job of interviewing them in the middle of that collapse. From the moment they walked onto the stage, the mood was different. There were no cheers of adoration, no excited fans screaming. Instead, there was curiosity, maybe even a little pity. Arsenio, who had celebrated them before, now had to look them in the eye and ask the questions everyone wanted answered. How did this happen? Did they know what they were doing? Did they ever think about the fans who had believed in them? Their answers were shaky. They blamed contracts, language barriers, promises that things would be different. They admitted mistakes, but also tried to explain away their choices. And through it all, the pain was visible. They weren't hardened con artists. They were two young men who had made terrible decisions and were now paying the price in front of the entire world.
How about Friends? Did Friends disappear? Because you all had, I used to see you all out, and you had a lot of people with you.
No, not as much as you, Arsenio.
Oh, okay. Now, did all those friends start to disappear?
It was amazing.
Arsenio pressed gently, but firmly. He asked about their friends, the people who used to surround them when they were on top. Were they still around? Rob and Fab admitted that the moment the scandal hit, those friends disappeared like smoke. One day, they were surrounded by adoring crowds. The next, they were alone. The most haunting moment came when Arsenio gave them a chance at redemption. He invited them to sing live, right there on his stage. This was their shot to prove they weren't just pretty faces and dance moves, that they actually had talent. They agreed. They sang. And instead of redemption, it felt like desperation. Their voices weren't terrible, but the weight of the scandal made every note sound like a plea for forgiveness.
And the moment to do it live has finally come. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, get ready, let's go!
The cameras captured it all, the pain, the awkwardness, the futility. And Arsenio sat there, torn. On one hand, he wanted to give them a chance, to show compassion. On the other, he knew that the world wasn't going to forgive them. Not that night, not ever. The industry had chewed them up, spit them out, and left them to wither under the spotlight. When the show ended, Arsenio couldn't shake the heaviness of it. He later admitted that he felt like he had participated in their public execution. He hadn't meant to humiliate them, but that's what the moment had become. Milli Vanilli weren't villains, but they weren't innocent either. They were trapped in a tragedy of their own making, and Arsenio's show had been the stage where the final act played out. Diana Ross. When Diana Ross walked onto Arsenio Hall's stage, it should have been magic. She was Motown royalty, the voice of a generation, and one of the most recognizable figures in music history. For Arsenio, having her on the show should have been an honor, a career highlight. But instead a magic, what unfolded felt like one of the most frustrating experiences he ever had with a guest.
I've been actually begging for Stevie to write me a song since he was 14 years old. I'm not kidding. And
But you've never done a Stevie Wonder song?
No, I haven't.
The warning signs were there before she even arrived. Her management team had sent over a list of requirements so long it felt like a head of state was visiting. Special lighting requests, camera angles that couldn't be altered, a list of off-limits topics that included the Supremes, Berry Gordy, and any hint of personal drama. Arsenio knew every star came with demands, but this wasn't a writer. This was an instruction manual for how to control an interview. By the time Ross sat down, the stage no longer belonged to Arsenio. She treated the couch like a throne and the cameras like tools for self-promotion. Every question he asked seemed to bounce off a wall of rehearsed answers. Stories sounded polished, calculated, as though she had been practicing them in front of a mirror. Instead of a conversation, it felt like a press junket. Arsenio tried, as he always did, to break through the polish and reach something real. He asked her about awkward moments, a stumble on stage, an embarrassing wardrobe slip, the kind of things that made even the most glamorous celebrities relatable. Ross smiled politely and brushed it all away. According to her, nothing ever went wrong. She was perfect, untouchable, flawless, and that, more than anything, made her feel distant.
Thank you very much.
Everything seems to work for you. I've seen you in concerts.
Wait.
No, it's like you're like everything's so perfect. You never like your heel never goes in your dress and you fall on the ground. You know, has anything awkward and imperfect ever happened to you?
No.
The frustration only grew when Arsenio asked about her husband. What could have been an intimate, lighthearted moment quickly turned into another scripted story about meeting a man who didn't recognize her. It was meant to sound charming, but instead, it rang false. It wasn't a story shared in confidence. It was a soundbite carefully designed to shape her image. And then came the moment that made Arsenio realize exactly what was happening. Ross launched into what felt like a speech, praising her charitable work, her spiritual values, her broader mission in life. These weren't answers to questions. They were pre-written talking points, delivered flawlessly, but without heart. Arsenio wasn't interviewing a person anymore. He was hosting a PR campaign. After the show, Ross's team went even further, complaining that Arsenio had been too personal. Too personal, despite the fact that every question had been cleared by them in advance. The irony was staggering. For Arsenio, it was the last straw. He walked away from that experience, realizing that not every icon deserved the pedestal people placed them on. Sometimes, the bigger the legend, the more hollow the conversation. Vanilla Ice. Vanilla Ice was out of control, desperate to prove himself, and determined to defend his image no matter how awkward it became. At the time of his appearance, Vanilla Ice was on top of the charts. Ice Ice Baby had made him a household name, and his fame was impossible to ignore. But with the fame came backlash. People questioned his authenticity, his background, his place in hip-hop. Was he a true product of the streets, or just a suburban kid cashing in on a culture that wasn't his?
Those that tried to hold the Iceman down can kiss my white ASS.
Yep.
Of course, you said the word and everything.
Oh, yeah, I said it.
Now you get a little time to expound on that.
Arsenio had no choice but to tackle the controversy head-on. Right from the start, he confronted Ice about his recent comments, where he told critics to kiss his white ass. The statement had already caused outrage, and now Ice had to face the music. Instead of easing into the interview, the tension was immediate. Vanilla Ice responded the way he thought would prove his toughness, by doubling down. He spoke about getting stabbed multiple times, even lifting his shirt to show his scars, as if they were credentials. To him, those wounds were proof of authenticity. But to Arsenio, and to many watching, it was uncomfortable and hollow. Street credibility isn't earned by trauma. It's earned by respect. And respect wasn't something you could flash under studio lights.
You didn't have to.
I had to prove that I'm not a liar for something I'm not even proud about, getting stabbed. I did get stabbed 5 times, I almost died. Something I'm not proud about. I am from the streets, and if you can't see that I'm from the streets, then you're blind.
The awkwardness only grew as Ice began making sweeping statements about culture. At one point, he claimed white people couldn't dance or keep rhythm, framing it as a compliment to black culture. But to Arsenio, who lived and breathed that culture, it came off as shallow flattery, clumsy, and condescending at the same time. It wasn't a bridge, it was a reminder of how far outside the culture Ice really was. And then came the stunt that made Arsenio's stomach turn. Ice brought out Flav, a respected figure in hip-hop, almost as if to say, "Look, I belong here. I have a black friend who supports me." On the surface, it might have looked like camaraderie, but in reality, it felt like tokenism. Flav wasn't there to share his story. He was being used as a prop in Ice's desperate campaign for credibility. Arsenio couldn't ignore it. He asked the obvious question, "Is that why you brought him out? Just to show you have a black supporter?" Ice denied it.
Is that why you brought him out, just to show you have a black supporter? And
No, I brought him out because he's a friend of mine.
The tension only deepened when the subject of MC Hammer came up. Hammer had once been a mentor figure for Ice, someone who gave him a chance, but rumors were circulating that Ice had spoken badly about him. Ice backpedaled furiously, denying everything, claiming he had nothing but respect. To Arsenio, it was just another example of Ice's opportunism, using people when it suited him, denying them when it didn't.
gave you a shot.
And I
on the
read
story.
some of the things that they said that I said bad about him, and I didn't say a lot of bad things about him. I never said anything bad about him. I have nothing to say bad about him. He's good, he's great, you know.
By the end of the interview, Arsenio wasn't angry so much as disheartened. What he had hoped would be a showcase of hip-hop's growing influence in mainstream culture had turned into a lesson in appropriation and insecurity. Vanilla Ice wanted so badly to be accepted that he turned his scars, his friends, and even his words into tools for validation. And instead of bringing hip-hop to new audiences with respect, he reduced it to a costume he could put on and take off at will. Sinead O'Connor. Sometimes the most painful encounters don't even happen on the set. For Arsenio Hall, one of the darkest chapters came years after his show's peak. In 2016, when the world was mourning the shocking death of Prince, O'Connor took to Facebook and dropped a bombshell. Without evidence, without context, she claimed that Arsenio had been Prince's drug supplier for decades. It was only 2 words, Arsenio Hall, but those words carried enough weight to ignite a firestorm.
In the wake of Prince's death, Sinead O'Connor is making damning allegations about the music icon's history with drugs. In a Facebook post, O'Connor says, 2 words for the DEA, investigating where Prince got his drugs over the decades.
For Arsenio, the accusations were devastating. Prince wasn't just a guest, he was a friend. He had trusted Arsenio's platform to debut music videos, to talk directly to fans, to create moments that weren't possible anywhere else. They shared a bond built on respect and loyalty. And now, in the middle of his grief, Arsenio was being painted as the man who had allegedly fueled the very addiction that many believed contributed to Prince's death. The timing couldn't have been worse. Fans were grieving. The media was hungry for any angle, and O'Connor's post spread like wildfire. Within hours, Arsenio's name was being dragged across headlines, blogs, and social media. He was being accused of not just wrongdoing, but of betraying a legend, of being complicit in the downfall of one of music's greatest icons. Arsenio responded quickly and firmly. His legal team called the claims ridiculous, absurd, and absolutely false. But even when you tell the truth, lies can spread faster. He had to watch helplessly as people debated his innocence online, with some believing O'Connor simply because her voice was loud at a moment of heightened emotion.
A rep for Hall says the claims are, quote, absolutely false, ridiculous, and absurd.
What made it worse was the helplessness of it all. If he fought back too hard, it looked like he was attacking a grieving woman. If he stayed silent, it looked like he had something to hide. It was a no-win situation. For a man who had spent his career talking, laughing, and connecting, Arsenio suddenly found himself gagged by the weight of someone else's lie. Eventually, O'Connor did issue an apology and a retraction. She admitted that her claims were baseless. But for Arsenio, the damage was done. Even if the record was corrected, the internet never forgets. His name had been tied, however briefly, to the ugliest rumors about a man he had truly cared for. This wasn't a guest who came onto his stage and caused trouble. This was a ghost from outside, a storm that hit years after the cameras had stopped rolling. And yet, for Arsenio, it was just as scarring as any live confrontation. Because sometimes the evil that enters your life isn't the chaos in front of you. It's the lies whispered when your back is turned. Louis Farrakhan. If Sinead O'Connor's attack represented the cruelty of misinformation, Louis Farrakhan's appearance on Arsenio's show represented the danger of truth. Not truth in the sense of honesty, but truth in the sense that the decision to host him revealed ugly realities about the limits of late-night television and the double standards in American media. The year was 1994, and Farrakhan was one of the most controversial figures in the country. He was preparing for the Million Man March, an event that promised to rally hundreds of thousands of black men in Washington, D.C. His words carried influence, but his reputation carried baggage accusations of anti-Semitism, divisive rhetoric, and a reputation that made mainstream America uneasy.
One of the most controversial interviews you ever had was Farrakhan.
Yes.
I mean, people were literally...
That was controversial before he came on. I mean, just the fact that it was booked. I noticed it the day it was announced.
When Arsenio announced that Farrakhan would appear on his show, the backlash was immediate. Critics asked why he would give a platform to someone so polarizing. Advertisers grew nervous, affiliate stations complained, and the media swarmed. Before the man had even sat on the couch, the interview was already branded a disaster. But Arsenio wasn't trying to endorse Farrakhan. He was trying to do what journalists do: interview the newsmakers, even the difficult ones. Barbara Walters could sit across from dictators and terrorists and be applauded for her courage. Ted Koppel could question controversial leaders and be praised for journalistic rigor. But when Arsenio, a black host, chose to give Farrakhan a platform, the rules suddenly changed.
I knew people were interested in him and the coming Million Man March that I had heard him talk about, which was my...
The interview itself wasn't nearly as explosive as people feared. Arsenio asked questions, pressed on certain points, and gave Farrakhan the chance to explain his positions. At times, he challenged him. At other times, he listened. It was journalism, plain and simple. But that distinction didn't matter. To many, the very act of booking Farrakhan meant Arsenio supported him. Nuance was lost in the noise. The backlash was brutal. Advertisers pulled their money. Viewers threatened boycotts. Critics painted Arsenio as reckless, even dangerous, for putting Farrakhan on his stage. And for Arsenio, the sting was doubled by the hypocrisy. Other journalists could host controversial figures and be praised for their courage. But as a black host with a largely black audience, he was treated differently. His decision was read as advocacy, not inquiry. The racial double standard cut deep. It wasn't just about Farrakhan anymore. It was about what was allowed of black hosts in mainstream spaces. Arsenio realized that he wasn't playing by the same rules as his peers. He wasn't being judged on his craft as a journalist, but on the expectations people had of his identity.
I'm not exactly sure why booking him caused people to deal with me any differently than Barbara Walters or anybody else that interviewed him.
In the end, the Farrakhan interview didn't end Arsenio's show, but the timing created the illusion that it did. He had already decided to step away, but the narrative stuck. For Arsenio, the memory of that interview was bitter. Not because of anything Farrakhan said, but because of what the reaction revealed. It showed him the limits of mainstream tolerance, the walls he could never climb, no matter how hard he worked, and the biases that would always shadow him as a black host in a world built for white journalists. Flavor Flav. When Flavor Flav came out on Arsenio Hall's stage, the atmosphere shifted. Normally, Flav brought energy, humor, and eccentricity, a hype man turned cultural icon. But this night wasn't about him. It was about Vanilla Ice, and that made the entire appearance feel wrong from the start. Vanilla Ice had been fumbling through one of the most uncomfortable interviews in Arsenio's career, constantly defending his credibility as a hip-hop artist. Then, in a move that stunned the audience, he brought out Flavor Flav, as if to say, "See, I'm accepted, I belong." Instead of being celebrated as the legend he was, Flav was reduced to a prop, a walking stamp of approval to validate Ice's street credibility.
One day he had to do the Arsenio Hall show. He said, "Flav, yo, could you come with me, man?" And the reason why is because he wanted to show the world that, hey, listen, if Flav can embrace me, everybody else.
For Arsenio, that was insulting. Flavor Flav wasn't just some accessory you paraded on stage to boost your reputation. He was part of Public Enemy, a group that had changed the conversation in music and politics. His contributions to hip-hop were undeniable. Yet here he was, used as a token in someone else's desperate struggle for acceptance. Arsenio asked Ice directly whether that was the purpose of Flav's appearance. Ice denied it, insisting they were simply friends. But the damage was already done. Instead of being respected, Flav had been used, and Arsenio, watching it unfold in real time, realized just how low Vanilla Ice was willing to go to prop up his fragile image.
Says to Arsenio, before I say anything, I want to give a shout out to my homeboy, my best friend. I'm like, I am? I mean, I just met you, kid. We best friends? Okay, cool, I'll take that. I want to give a shout out to my man Flavor Flav. Man, when he said my name, you had to see the look on Arsenio Hall's face. It drops.
Flavor Flav didn't cause the awkwardness he suffered from it. For Arsenio, the memory of that night stung not because of anything Flav did, but because of how a legend had been reduced to a pawn in someone else's game. Andrew Dice Clay. Andrew Dice Clay's time on the Arsenio Hall show is remembered as one of the more heated and uncomfortable segments in late-night television during the early 1990s. Known for his outrageous style, Clay carried his larger-than-life persona onto the stage, immediately launching into material that was as abrasive as it was polarizing.
It is my assumption that there's a lot of stuff on this album that you couldn't even approach out there.
No, not unless you want to be in jail in an hour. It's a great album, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Should be at least 12 years old to listen to something like this.
His brand of comedy often relied on crude nursery rhymes, explicit language, and an unapologetically macho swagger, which clashed with the tone that Arsenio usually cultivated on his program. During the interview, Clay doubled down on his reputation for being brash, sparring with critics through jokes and comments that left little room for subtlety. While his fans saw him as boldly authentic, others found his act tasteless and unnecessarily offensive, creating palpable tension throughout the appearance. Arsenio attempted to rein him in with humor, but Clay's unfiltered delivery kept steering the moment toward discomfort.
Material for talk shows, you know, but you had guts. You brought me on. That's a beautiful thing.
No, I don't know. Have you really had problems, though, with some of the shows?
Have I had problems with some of the shows? Well, you know, some of them think I'm a little off color, this and that, and but it's okay because it doesn't really make a difference because I mean, like, here, you bring me on. Did I say one dirty thing?
The backlash surrounding the performance fueled ongoing debates about free speech, comedy, and censorship, further polarizing the audience. Clay's appearance illustrated the struggle of late-night TV to balance entertainment with responsibility, and it solidified his legacy as both a boundary-pushing comic and a lightning rod for controversy in mainstream culture. Madonna's appearance on the Arsenio Hall show in the early 1990s remains one of the most controversial moments in the program's history. Known for her provocative personality, she pushed boundaries during the interview by delivering blunt, sarcastic answers that left Arsenio visibly uncomfortable at times.
He went back to Paula's house, and you know what she did to him?
No, actually, I was watching your video and got too excited.
Instead of giving thoughtful responses, she often turned questions into opportunities for shock value, steering the conversation toward sex, power, and her defiance of mainstream expectations. While some fans admired her refusal to play it safe, many critics argued she came across as dismissive and confrontational, clashing with the lighthearted tone the show was known for. Madonna's habit of using edgy humor and risque remarks unsettled parts of the audience, making the appearance feel tense rather than entertaining.
Have you ever met Paula?
Well, actually, I met her on the MTV Awards, the one that you hosted.
Yeah.
He was standing close to her a lot, like the whole night.
Arsenio was clearly not so comfortable for her digging his personal life in the show. The interview highlighted the divide between her rebellious image and traditional late-night talk show etiquette, cementing her reputation as both a fearless pop icon and a difficult guest for Arsenio Hall. Prince, if there was one guest who defined Arsenio's show, it was Prince. He wasn't just a performer, he was a force of nature. Every time he appeared, it was an event. He debuted songs, revealed projects, and gave Arsenio's audience moments they couldn't see anywhere else. Their friendship was real, built on mutual respect.
Is there a huge vault of material that you've created that we've never even heard? And how do you make those choices? Because I'd like to hear everything that you pin. You know, just to hear it.
That's what made the fallout after Prince's death so devastating. To have Sinead O'Connor accuse Arsenio of being Prince's drug supplier wasn't just an attack on his reputation, it was a desecration of a friendship that had meant everything to him. Prince had trusted him, leaned on him, and shared his art through him. To be painted as the villain in that story was unbearable. Arsenio fought back, suing O'Connor for defamation. And though she later apologized, the sting never faded. Because once your name is tied to something like that, even if it's false, it never completely washes off. For Arsenio, it felt like betrayal from every direction from O'Connor, from the media that amplified her words, and from a culture that seemed eager to believe the worst about him.
Time now for the feed. Nothing compares to getting sued for $5 million. That's the latest tune for singer Sinead O'Connor. Oh yes, getting sued for defamation by Arsenio Hall.
Prince's appearances on the show had been some of Arsenio's proudest moments. But in the years after, they became bittersweet, tainted by accusations that had no basis in truth. For Arsenio, it was one of the cruelest twists of his career to be remembered not just as the host who gave Prince a platform, but as the man falsely accused of bringing him down.
O'Connor accuses Hall of supplying the late Prince with drugs over the decades, even spiking her with drugs one.
Looking back, Arsenio Hall could see the pattern. Each of these encounters, the activists who stormed his stage, the pop stars who crumbled in disgrace, the legends who arrived with entitlement, the rappers who exploited culture, the friends who turned into accusers. But instead of breaking him, those nights shaped him. They showed his resilience, his willingness to confront chaos head-on, and his refusal to let anyone else dictate what his show should be. Even now, decades later, he remembers those nights not just as bad interviews, but as defining moments. They revealed the cost of truth, the pain of betrayal, and the impossibility of pleasing everyone in a world built on performance.